My family had a small acreage of farms in Canadian pastures. It is not too far out from our city, but far enough that it's very rare to have unexpected visitors. At the time, we had some sheep and chickens, but it wasn't a huge farm. It was just my mum, my dad, my sister and I. My sister was 5 years older than me, so only 7 at the time. We also had a sweet dog named Maggie. My parents has always said that she is the best farm dog we ever had. She was special, very sweet with other animals and kids. She never barked or got upset without a good reason, much unlike our last puppy who would bark at the wind. My dad was out of town this particular night, probably visiting my grandparents in his town down south. My mum was alone with just us little guys, and Maggie was sleeping soundly in the porch. So my mum woke up in the middle of the night to Maggie growling. My mum's a pretty light sleeper, so it doesn't take much to wake her up, but this was very unusual behaviour for a puppy. My mum thought it was probably an animal, so she took a peek outside. Sometimes coyotes or large bucks would upset Maggie, so that was the most likely explanation. However, it wasn't the case on this night. Our farm is right adjacent to the highway, and there's a long, unlit lane that leads into our yard. It wasn't obvious at first, but my mum saw a dark vehicle slowly creeping down the lane. The car's headlights were shut off, and we didn't have a lot of light in the yard. My mum's stomach immediately sunk. Anyone with good intentions wouldn't shut off their headlights. She also had 2 little kids in the house that she had to protect. She watched them slowly creep into the yard. I don't know how many there were, but at least a couple of guys got out of the vehicles, then heading towards a shop where my dad keeps his tools, tractor, etc. Now at the time, there was a big power panel on the side that controlled all the electricity to the yard lights in the house. They opened it up and started to go through it, evidently trying to figure out how to shut off the power. God knows what their intentions were. Luckily, my family has a hunting rifle, and my mum grew up on farms, so she knew how to use one. Now she quietly pops open the door, just enough to stick the barrel out and fire a warning shot in their direction. They freaked out and hopped back into their vehicle, reversing all the way down the lane so that she couldn't see their license plate. I honestly have no idea what these guys' intentions were. Maybe simply rob us, but the idea of multiple people pulling into the yard with no lights on, shutting off the power, is terrifying. Either way, I'm extremely grateful for our sweet Maggie and my mum for keeping us safe. It's been 21 years since that happened. I pray I never see them again. When I was younger, I used to live on a house that was surrounded by farmland. It meant we had very few neighbours and very little to do. Now, I was scared of the dark. This phobia didn't fade away until I became an adult. The thing I hated most about living here was being bored, and if I had to walk home at night, because there were no street lamps obviously, only the moonlight if you were lucky. There's one incident that my mum later told me about that terrifies me to this day. More the fact that this happened and I was completely oblivious to it. Apparently when I was 7 years old, I was asleep in my room one day when it was snowing outside. Now there was mysteriously footprints leading into and around our house, but there never seemed to be anybody else there to make them. What's more strange is how that they seemingly vanished after a point, like someone had literally floated away. My dad was always skeptical of this and thought it was someone playing a prank on us. Now apparently, I would always complain about seeing a strange person at my window and talking to them, which at first my mum and dad shook off as me being paranoid and my imagination playing tricks on me as I was scared of the dark. Well, apparently I went on about this for months until eventually my dad decided to sleep in my room with me, and lo and behold, I woke him up saying that man's there again. My dad said don't worry and to go back to sleep. He then rolled over, and to his horror, he saw a man peering in at me watching me sleep. He got up immediately, grabbed his rifle, called my mum to go and get some help, and rushed outside, but unfortunately the man was gone. Now this is in the day before you really had camera systems in your home. What we did do is buy a really big guard dog that stayed in the front of the house, and after that, he never returned. Stranger danger was something my mum was hyper vigilant about telling us of. She had always warned us about the horse farm down the road from us, and the weird people that lived there. Well, it is about a mile away, and I usually was only that far from home if I was on my bike with a group, so I wasn't really concerned. One day, I was walking in my neighbourhood when some neighbours I didn't know well began speaking to me. While we knew most of our immediate neighbours, this couple lived on a street perpendicular to ours, and I only interacted with them at Halloween. If that. I was probably 7 or 8, and they told me they were giving a trampoline away. And boy, had I always wanted a trampoline. Begging my parents to get one for years. I was over the moon. I told them I'd have to ask my parents, so surprisingly though, they told me I could have it. It was in the backyard waiting for me, but not to come back with my parents. I thought this was a little strange, and I didn't listen to them about not getting my parents. I wanted a trampoline. Now my dad is a totally oblivious person, so apparently when I told him this, it didn't raise a red flag. He came along with me to ask about the trampoline. We knock on their door and wait on their footsteps, but no one comes. I was annoyed. I really wanted one. Now years later, reflecting on the event, I realised that there's a small fenced field, and that's where they'd ride the horses sometimes. I once even pet the horse and admired the owner as she rode. I didn't think of it as a farm aside from the one horse and fenced in area. It seemed to be a normal yard to me, so my mother's warnings are in vain. I shudder thinking about what would have happened if I'd gone to the home alone. Thankfully I had more sense. Though at the time I didn't realise how close I was to danger. Just how close I was to having a trampoline. My dad ended up looking in through the windows and he could actually see them hiding, waiting for me. We never went around that area again and reported it to the police. Growing up, I lived in a farmer's house. My dad and most of my family are all farmers, so growing up around nature was a normal thing to me. Now we had a problem with crows and other animals trying to eat all of our crops, so we put up multiple scarecrows around the house where we lived. Now I was always paranoid of them as a child. I used to tell my mum stories about how they would move. Of course, she just thought it was my imagination running wild and never thought anything of it. That was until one day she saw one move too. After constantly complaining, my mum and dad eventually switched rooms with me and would let me sleep in their room. My mum said it was one moonlit night where she was laying in bed unable to sleep. She got up and decided to go and make a drink in the kitchen. As she's looking out the window, she was sure that she saw something move. Confused by this and a little groggy, she decided to go back to bed and try and get some sleep. When she got back to her bedroom, she was sure it's just her mind playing tricks on her, so she gone back to sleep. However, she heard constant sounds outside and knew something was up. She then goes back to the kitchen to get a better look, and what she sees terrifies her. Because of the moonlight, she can see the reflection off of two pieces of glass. After closer inspection, she can tell that these are a pair of binoculars. My mum let out a blood-curdling scream at this point. That's what I remember, and my dad telling me to stay in my room and not move. He quickly grabs his hunting rifle and fires a warning shot into the sky. What's more crazy is that whoever was watching us with the binoculars didn't even move. By the time my dad had gotten his dog and went outside, whoever this was long gone. What he did find is truly harrowing. Upon closer inspection of where my mum saw this figure, she could see some old tattered clothes that appeared to be almost identical to what our scarecrows were wearing. This sick person decided to imitate a scarecrow in order to spy on us. We very quickly after moved houses, and I only learnt about this story in my adult life in order not to scare me. And to be honest, I'm thankful that they never told me at the time, because that would have truly terrified me. I'm originally from a state where it's predominantly hot all year. I'm not a big fan of warm weather, so when winter comes I have my windows open and spend as much time as possible outside. Temperatures average around the 50s, but that's besides my point. We live close to lots of fields and have lots of open space around us. It was one of those chilly winter nights. I was about 10 years old, and the only people home were two nannies and me. They were at the other side of the home watching TV, while I was in my room. It's getting late, likely around 10 PM, so I decide to take a shower, hopping into bed. Everything's fine. I hop out to the shower, getting ready for bed. At this point, I should quickly go over the layout of my room. It's rectangular and has two windows facing the front door entrance to my home. From my windows you can see a walkway to the front door, and the path is sort of gated in brick. Basically, you have to enter the driveway, then turn left and walk down a path that leads to my front door. My bed faces one of those windows, and all I can see all the way down is a path. Both windows have a mesh screen. This is where things get scary. Like I mentioned earlier, I had the window facing my bed open to let the cool air in. My room was well lit, so it's hard to see anything through the window. However, as soon as I turned off the light, I see the figure of a man with his face pressed up against the screen. In that moment, I felt his piercing gaze, his motionless, smiling. He had facial hair that looked as though his whole face was covered in fur, and the hair on his head was the same length. I briefly thought I'd imagined this and was seeing something that wasn't actually there. Now, I'd taken a couple of quick steps back towards the window to get a closer look to confirm what I saw was real. It was. This all happened in a matter of seconds. I bolted out of the room towards my room where my nannies are. The hallway in the house is very narrow and long, and there's large windows facing the entrance. I didn't dare look out. I reached my room where my nannies are in and tell them what happened, and they just laughed at me. To be quite honest, it was a boy who cried wolf situation. I always played pranks on them, so it was hard for me to be taken seriously. I had to beg them to come check with me, from which I can remember they took seriously. When we get to my room, there's no one there. My window screen is left untouched and the man is gone. I don't think they were totally convinced, and neither were my parents. I couldn't sleep in my room for days because of the incident and nothing was done about it. My house didn't even have an alarm system, so there was nothing stopping them coming back. I'm still very disappointed how the situation was handled. I had no power at all. I have no idea how long the guy was out there for watching me, and if he showed up again after. I remember how messed up his smile was, how menacing it was. I'm glad that I was not harmed by this man and that it was only a visit. I at least hope. I stopped opening my windows at night, and I now get paranoid when I feel the cold air at night time. One of the weirdest things that happened to me was during one winter near my house. Now, the property that I live on was actually a very old one that my grandparents used to own, and I'd always remember my grandpa telling me weird stories about how sometimes he would see faces out in the woods. I never really took him too seriously, to be honest, and I thought maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. But one day I had an experience I truly can't explain. It was close to nightfall, and I kept on hearing a ringing sound outside. It sounded like a ringing in my ears, but it wasn't from my head. I decided I have to go out and see what's going on in case there's going to be an electrical fire or something. I was actually pretty paranoid of that at the time. As I got outside, I realised that the sound seems to be coming from all directions, and is something that I've never heard before or since. I think this is really odd, and I look around at what appears to be a large sheet of ice near a tree. I stare at it until I realise that this is where the sound's coming from, but it seems to be moving. Now, I kid you not, there seemed to be a completely transparent sheet of ice that was moving, that looked just like a human. It then puts its hand towards where its mouth should be, and then slowly walks off into the forest, and the noise immediately stops. I very quickly hurried inside, and I tell my mom about what happened, and she tells me that my grandpa used to report seeing these things all the time, and he even had a name for it because he'd see it so frequently. And my mom was actually quite concerned because she too had heard the ringing sound before but never went out to investigate. I've heard the sound since, but I've never been brave enough to go outside again to find out exactly what it is. Not long ago, my brother was telling my mum about something my dad had said to him quite a few years ago that always puzzled him. My dad passed away about 10 years ago, so I can't ask him about it, but it bugs me that I can't get more information. My dad loved being in the woods. They were like a second home to him. Whenever we'd taken a family trip into the woods, I could ask him what any animal sound was that I heard in the area, and he would tell me exactly what animal was making it, and any other details I asked about. He grew up on a farm and spent time as a forest ranger working in fire towers, and he enjoyed hunting, so he knew nature pretty well. The woods that he would take my family trips to were ones that he was very familiar with, as some of the fire towers where he worked were still standing in that area. My brother said that there was a weekend that my dad decided to take a trip to the woods by himself to do some small game hunting. Not unusual for him at all. The strange part was that my dad came home early from where we lived at the time. Now it took 2.5 hours, and sometimes longer depending on traffic, to get to the woods he likes. He didn't spend the night, even though he had brought everything he needed to camp for 2 nights. Now both my mum and my brother remembered him coming home early. Only my dad never mentioned to my mum why, and only let it slip to my brother once. My dad mentioned that he heard something make a sound in the woods, a sound that he never heard in his life. He knew it wasn't from any of the animals in the woods. The sound made him pack up and head home during the night. My brother tried to press him for more details, but he quickly changed the subject and said he never wanted to discuss it again. He never described what type of sound it was. He just said he knew it wasn't from an animal that should have been there, or could have been there, and my dad was never easily spooked, especially not by nature. Whatever he heard, we have no idea, but it sure got to him. It eats me to think that I can't really find out exactly what happened. My brothers still take trips to those woods and they've never heard anything out of the ordinary while out there. Now I'm one of those people that can only really relax when I'm in nature, and luckily for me, I lived in an area that was very close to nature. Having been a forest ranger before, I guess I was really at one with nature and found peace in myself out there, so I didn't mind going during some gloomy mornings or during the winter months. I actually preferred it in some ways, to be honest. So I'd set out on one of these walks, just like the thousands I had before probably. I'd clocked up hundreds of miles in forest just from walking, and not only on my job. Now, I wasn't actually on duty during this particular day. Now, if I said it wasn't cold out, I would be lying. There was actually frost all over the floor, which made it look really cool, I thought. But to some people this might be a bad thing, but I don't know. I'm walking through an area of forest that has really nice tall trees. They're pretty bare at the bottom but have some leaves on the top and some leaves on the floor. I liked being able to walk through, especially at times like this when there was mist. It looked like the start of a horror movie, or maybe a Halloween movie, but I guess they're the same thing. But to give you a picture, the trees look almost black. There's an overcast so you can't really see the sun, and there's frost all over the floor and some water dripping from the trees. Again, to some people I'd understand why they might not like it, but to me, it was beautiful. So I begin on my walk like normal, and I realised it is actually quite cold, so I decide I probably shouldn't stop and should just keep going, because that's when you get cold, when you stop moving. And where water kept falling onto my head, it was actually making me a little bit wet, and that's the easiest way to lose body heat. Now, I'm having a really good time on my walk, and I eventually make it through into a clearing where the trees change and there's relatively tall grass. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Scotland, but it kind of looks like some of the forests in there, and I thought this was really beautiful. Now, as I'm going along my way, I keep on catching some strange movement on the mossy rocks. It's really hard to describe, but it almost looks like every so often I see something move. Kind of like there's a lag in my vision, but there's literally nothing wrong with my vision because I have eyes that are perfectly good. I think maybe it's just my brain going a bit funny, so I decide to keep going. Now I'm following an old wall which is really beautiful and has more of this moss on it. Now I can't actually see very far ahead of me because the fog is quite thick now. It's slowly getting darker, but I know roughly where I am, so I haven't got anything to worry about really. I decide I need to make it away from the moss and get to an area that I know better. I can hear a faint moaning in the distance through the fog where I can't actually see. It's bizarre because it doesn't sound like any of the animals that I've encountered before, or anything that you'd usually expect to find out here. And I also can't see it. There's just fog everywhere. It also gives a nice silence to the forest, well, except for this sound. It's a very deep kind of moan, but more aggressive if that makes sense. I think this is strange, but I think it could just be some animal I've not really encountered before and continue onwards. I decide that I should probably try and get to some high ground and make my way back to where I can return to my car easily because it is really cold, so I continue walking. I'm off the trail now, just going through the grassy stuff. Now, it's actually quite annoying because every time I'm walking, there are trees that have kind of fallen or where the branches are low, so I have to keep ducking under them. I continue making my way when I realise that one of the rocks looks like it's moving. It's a large green moss covered one and it seems like it's just sliding down, but not making any sounds. I stop and stare at it until it slowly goes off into the fog where I can't see it now. I think this is really bizarre. It appears like it almost stands up to the height of a human man and slowly kind of moves along like it's got parts of it that aren't fully connected. You know how if you move a mop, kind of like that, like detached but joined at the same time. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little worried at this point. It literally looks like someone in a ghillie suit, or maybe like a sniper suit. I try and get closer to it, but it disappears over the hill. I figured out what's happened now. Somebody is hunting in a ghillie suit but hasn't told anyone. Well, not me at least. I actually get a bit angry at this point because that's actually really dangerous for me, because they could easily mistake me for something in the fog and take a shot at me. And guess what? There's not meant to be hunters here. At least I know what was making those creepy sounds earlier. I move further along and I can see more of the moss covered rocks. It looks just like whatever this person is, and as I stop for a few minutes, I can hear the sound again, this time closer, like a deep moaning sound. I look off and once again, I can see this thing. It looks like it's crouched down with its head down against a tree, moving very slightly forwards and backwards. I then notice to the left of it, there seems to be another person in a ghillie suit doing exactly the same thing. I think this is really odd. It just looks like big moss covered people moving, almost in distress. Now I call out and say, hey, you need to stop this. You're really scaring me, and you're not meant to be hunting here. Then there's silence. One of these things stands up and just stares at me. I say stare because I can't really see its eyes, but this thing's tall. It's probably 6 feet at least, and it's not moving now. The other one's doing the same. At this moment, I'm starting to really doubt whether this is actually a person messing around with me or not. Or maybe some deranged crazy person, I don't know. And then I hear the sound again. It's definitely coming from whatever these things are, and they start slowly moving towards me. Not very quick, almost like limping towards me, but something's just so off about it. I think maybe it's people trying to scare me off, so I stand my ground. Well, that lasts for about 2 seconds before I get a gut feeling that I shouldn't really be here right now. I turn around and start making a quick walk away. I know if I walk quickly I can probably escape whatever this is, but I don't want to run and hurt myself on a rock. I turn around and I can't see too far because of the fog. I do this for a good few minutes and realise that this thing is keeping pace with me pretty nicely. I then make my way to even more of the moss covered rocks, and I get a weird feeling that something just isn't right. I feel like I'm in something's home and I'm not meant to be, and in all my years of being a ranger I've never seen a creature like this. It really looks like a weird swamp creature, but not. I don't know, it just should not be out in the forest. Now, I've heard stories from other rangers about this area having tribes that used to live here that would do all kinds of rituals, and they would describe some kind of night creatures, but these were completely different. The thing that had been described to us was much taller, almost like a giant pencil that would walk along slowly, but similarly, this thing would actually go in pairs or groups, so I don't know, maybe this was a winter variant I was seeing. No, stop. My mind's playing tricks on me. This can't be real. I continue going, and the fog's actually relatively annoying now. It's kind of making me feel like there's too much moisture everywhere, though I guess that's what it is. I continue until eventually I'm on a path again and I pick up the pace. I manage to make it towards trees that are actually a lot easier to move through and the path is straight. I stop and take a moment to question my own sanity. What are these things? What did I just see? And sure enough, one of them catches up with me. I can just about make a silhouette out in the background, and sure enough, it's slowly coming towards me. I scream, "Hey, I'm a park ranger and you better stop or you're going to be in some real trouble." The thing keeps moving, and I can just feel water dripping onto my head from some of the trees. I decide that I have to sprint now. I actually fall instantly and I feel like I'm gonna faint. I don't know whether I can get up again. My leg feels really weird, but thankfully it was just some of the water from the moisture that's in the air, and I was completely fine. I get up and start sprinting through the forest and eventually make it back to where my car is parked. Annoyingly, I have to spend about another 2 minutes trying to get the moisture and condensation off of my car before I can actually start it up to get out of there. Before I go, I look around quickly, not before locking the doors, and I can't see anything. Just the very start of the tree line where the forest is. I don't see any more movement this time. Now I want to say that I reported this and made a big report, but I couldn't. I knew I'd probably lose my job if I did, or at least I would question my sanity and reputation. Now, I don't really believe in Sasquatches or any of them kind of things, but I know this thing wasn't a bear, and I'm almost certain it wasn't a person. A person wouldn't be out in the forest for that long, that cold, and why would they be stalking me, specifically me? I announced that I was a ranger, and I told them that they weren't supposed to be hunting there, but they were following me. Maybe it was me that was being hunted the whole time. I just don't know exactly by what, and it haunts me to this day. I never went back to that area again. I'm not a ranger, but I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods, and some weird stuff happened there, but usually it was easy to explain. One of the things that happened scared the life out of me, even to this day. I was a leader for the age group of 8 to 10, and we're out on a camping trip. It was the first year that we stayed on terrain that was huge. Normally we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive so we're aware of possible dangers, but this time it's impossible. Every camp we have what we called a night game. It was usually a scary game in which the kids would have to complete several tasks while leaders scared them. Obviously, we had one too during that camp. We mask up as monsters and hide out in the woods close to the checkpoints they have to go past. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide in beside the trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining that things are there that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed that I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end, and I saw the shadow again. This time, I could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding trying to scare the kids and decided to go over there, as it's about time to go back. I aim my flashlight towards a tree, and while getting closer, I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looks like a torn burlap sack over them and a few plastic bags that looks like they've been tied together. I started to feel pure dread, like something's off. I ask if everything's okay and I don't get a response. The only thing I heard was a sound that sounded like somebody knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from the person. The knocking sounded like somebody smacking his head onto a tree, and I look and realize it appears to be a male. He's barefoot and his arms and legs were covered in crusted mud. His hands are weirdly cramped up. I'm convinced this was just one of the other leaders playing a prank on me, and I tell them stop. He then slowly turns his head around and starts towards me. Something inside of me told me just to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, and I didn't want to turn around and look in case I ran into a tree. I eventually arrived back at the campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that is already there. They couldn't have gone there before me, and if they did, they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into normal clothes. I tell them that you've given me a good scare with that, and they look at me weird, thinking, was I trying to scare them? The next day I wanted to check it out. Who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and was hiding there but dying of hypothermia. I took someone with me just in case, but it was endless trees. We arrived at the tree. I saw the person banging his head on, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit there. We called the cops, and they looked around and quickly brushed it off as a prank from another scouting group or some of the kids. And we didn't notice anything weird after that, but I don't know what to think of it. My friend and I were hiking in Blue Ridge, Georgia. We were just going camping for one day, and the trail was part of the Appalachian Trail. Near the very start of it, my friend told me about one story of one of his friends. He said that he had heard voices and footsteps at night near Blood Mountain, and he had to night hike because the noises were so intense. Now back to the main story. We found a campsite and set up shop. As it got darker, we got a bad feeling like somebody's watching us, and then it started. We saw a pair of glowing eyes about 100 meters away from our fire. Now the thing that was really odd is the colour. They're bright red. My friend then goes to dunk his head in the creek near our tent and claims that he felt something pushing him towards the water. His shirt was soaked and his nose was bleeding from a rock. Then after we heard a woman's voice, so we can't really make out exactly what she was saying. We hear it in front of us, behind us, and to the left of us over the creek. It wouldn't have been a night hiker, but there was no trail. I don't know who it could have been, and the night hikers weren't usually going around with glowing red eyes. We also heard footsteps around us and sticks snapping. We finally decide that we have to get out, but must sleep first, and my friend falls asleep before me, and I heard twigs snapping right next to my head outside of the tent. And that's pretty much it. Very, very creepy. If you decide to go camping in Blue Ridge, know that you have to be careful out there. Now I need to give you some context before starting my story. My parents owned an absolutely beautiful property in a deep part of the forest that nobody ever really went to. My girlfriend was always paranoid, so I'd always have to make fun of her whenever we went there, but she absolutely hated staying there at night. One of the reasons I actually understood. During one time we stayed there during December, I stupidly woke up in the night and turned off all of the radiators because I was worried that there was going to be a fire. We had 2 oil ones and 1 electric one, and I was convinced that in the night I would move round and knock off the blanket and make a massive fire and we would die. So She woke up from the cold and said she'd never sleep there again. And I knew that was going to happen, but I decided I wanted to stay there a few nights. So, one particular summer evening, around April, we set off and make it to the cabin. Now, we're having a really good time there, and my girlfriend decides that she wants to go out into nature to have a look around, because this is something that she loves to do. Now, I don't want to go out this soon. I have some work to do on my laptop, so I'm staying behind to do that. And I'm actually quite annoyed because there's things I want to do with friends that live not too far away, but I just have work to do that's making everything clash. And I don't want to have the feeling, where you've just finished work, then just try and do something social, and your brain just can't connect to changing from work, so you just feel like you're not enjoying it. Well, yeah, I was a bit annoyed trying to work as quick as possible, but God likes a hard worker, so I stay. I say goodbye to my girlfriend as she goes out, then I go into another room. I'm working away on my laptop and I can hear the door open. I think maybe my girlfriend's come back to get something, but I can't hear much. I say to her, "Hey, what have you come back for?" But she doesn't reply. I think this is odd, but I thought she was probably just annoyed at me for something and continue working. I can hear some more movement, then eventually the door closes. I think to myself, great, God knows what I've done wrong now. But I decide that I need to continue working. Deciding that I don't want to be in trouble when she comes back, I decide to give my girlfriend a call and say, "Are you annoyed at me?" To which she's surprised and says no. I say, "Why didn't you say anything when I come in?" She says, "I've been outside the whole time, what are you talking about? Stop playing these games on me." And I say, "No, wait, didn't you come in then just ignore me?" And she says no. She says, "I'm sure it was one of the neighbours in the other properties just getting something and you heard their door." I think this is odd because I haven't heard anybody else around but us, and it's extremely rare that they would visit. I tell her, "Yeah, you're probably right," and go back to my work. I decide that I'm going to have a quick look round and see if anything's missing, but everything's where it should be, so I decide it's probably nothing, and I'm here anyway. I'd happily fight if I need to. I'm not saying I'm strong or anything, but maybe I could scare someone, who knows, so I continue on with my work. Now, I probably do so for another good hour or so, and I take a call off of my friend. He calls to invite me out to a friend's surprise birthday, and I desperately want to go, but I know it's not possible because I have to go out to 2 or 3 other places after, but I really want to try and go, and I tell him not to worry, I'm going to try and make it, but I'll let him know. I say God as I put the phone down. I'm desperate to get out and do things, but I'm chain bound to my laptop doing work. I decide to press on. Now, as I'm doing my work, I get another phone call from my girlfriend who says, "Are you gonna come over?" I say, "What do you mean?" She's probably about 400 meters away from me, but she says, "Where are you?" I say, "I'm in doing my work, you know what I'm doing." She says, "Huh? That's odd, I thought I just saw you outside." I say, "No, I don't think it's anything, but you should probably come back," to which she agrees. I decide to go out and try and meet her halfway there. I think it's a lot safer that way. I actually look around quite paranoid, thinking maybe someone's there, but surely it's my neighbours, I try and affirm to myself. But I'm wrong. I can clearly see into the other cabins that nobody else is home, and I quickly go out and find my girlfriend. More than anything, I'm happy I'm not in trouble for no reason, and my girlfriend's actually relatively happy, so we come back and end up watching a film. Now, we ended up going out for the rest of the day, and luckily, I managed to do all of the things I need to, and I actually feel really happy about this. We then come back to the cabin, and all is normal. We have a really good time, and slowly fall asleep. Now, I probably fell asleep for a couple of minutes, when I'm awoken suddenly. My girlfriend's annoyed at me. I don't know what for. She says, "Hey, why do you keep talking?" I say, "What are you talking about?" I haven't said a word to you. She gets angry and says, stop kidding, I'm actually really scared now. I say again, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been asleep the whole time. She says, were you not talking to me? I said, no, of course not. It's probably just in my sleep. Now you need to do the same. My girlfriend eventually falls asleep, and I do too. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I have a strange feeling that something's off. I can't really describe exactly what it is, but I feel like somebody's behind me when I'm working on my laptop. And one of the things I made has gone missing. I think it's really strange because it's work related and I don't understand why my girlfriend would move it or anyone would take it. I was actually worried at the time that I had memory issues because of an injury from work, but it turns out I was wrong about it and I just had poor memory. So I kind of brush it off as nothing and just me going a bit senile. Now I drink some of my water, and not long afterwards I feel really weird. I feel really lightheaded and dizzy, almost like I've been drugged or something. I think I've just stayed up too long trying to do work and I decide to lay down. I don't tell my girlfriend what's wrong because, like I said at the time, I was really worried about having some kind of brain issue from work. My girlfriend then goes out again eventually and I just tell her have a good time and she goes. Now I wake up 2 hours later to miss phone calls off my girlfriend. I have the worst headache ever, and I realise my girlfriend's just moving out the door now. I say, hey, where are you going? But she doesn't reply to me. I then go to call her quickly because I don't feel like moving, and she says, why haven't you answered my calls? I say, what do you mean? Why did you just leave? My girlfriend then goes completely silent and quickly comes inside. She then says, what's wrong with you? You look absolutely horrible. I say, I don't know, I feel really bad at the minute. I say, I think it's an injury from work, but she says, no, it can't be. I then realise that it's probably from what I just drank. I say, babe, don't drink any of the water, there's definitely something wrong here. But then she reminds me, what do you mean I just left? I say, when I was waking up, I saw you quickly leave through the door. To which my girlfriend gives me a pure look of horror and says, no, I was outside for the last 2 hours and got annoyed you wouldn't reply to my calls, but I thought you were busy working. I then tell her frantically, no, ever since I've drank this water I felt terrible, but I definitely saw you or someone leaving. We then both look at each other horrified. I quickly go and grab a knife and start shouting at whoever it is to come out or I'm gonna stab them. It must have looked pretty funny because I was saying things I'd seen in movies, but we're both scared now. My girlfriend goes and waits by the window because it's safer there. I search every inch of the apartment and I can't find anything. I think this is really strange and I say we have to get out of here and make a police report. My girlfriend agrees and we gather up the stuff we need, which is basically our laptops, and quickly head over to the car. Just as I'm about to drive off, my girlfriend says, no, wait, look. I don't know what she's talking about, but she says, look, please, do you not see that? I look up and I can clearly see some kind of marks on the window. I get out really quickly, this time filled with rage. I still have a terrible headache and I just assumed I was dehydrated, but I make my way over to the cabin windows and I can clearly see handprints all over them. They're from the outside too, and there's lots of different hands of different sizes. I don't need to hang around much longer. I just played it cool and quickly sprinted back to the truck. Well, as cool as you can look when you look terrified and you don't say anything and just run and hit the accelerator as quick as possible. My girlfriend doesn't actually say anything to me because it's clear what's happened. She has better eyes than I do and she can see all of the handprints. I didn't want to tell her when we were driving away that all of them were different sizes. We eventually make it over to my parents' house and I go and tell my dad what happened. I don't want to tell my girlfriend too many details because I know she'll get really scared, and I trusted telling my dad. My dad gave me a funny look and told me that some of the neighbours have reported seeing weird things out in the forest at night. in the sense of figures in all black walking round, seemingly trying desperately not to be spotted. I say, "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" And he says, "Son, I didn't want to worry you. I'm sorry for what's happened." I forget to tell my dad about the water that I've drank and how strange I felt, and my dad gives me a really weird look, saying they probably drugged you and they were probably trying to kidnap you. I feel absolutely awful now. I'm more annoyed at myself for being so ignorant. Even if I'd got one of them with the knife, surely the others would have come. The weird thing was, though, there was almost no signs of anybody around other than the person I saw in the handprints. I mean, you'd think all of the leaves in the forest would have been disturbed, but they were pretty normal, and I just don't know what to think of it. Of course, we never went back there again, but I haven't really felt right about the whole situation since, and I actually get really paranoid when I'm going to sleep. I'm not a ranger, but I was out camping with my dog one night along the Mulligan rim of Arizona. It was dark, and we're sitting around the campfire when we hear something behind a bush close to our camp. Instead of my dog barking at it, he begins to whimper. I didn't think anything of it and just tend to the fire. After a couple of minutes, we hear more noises from a different bush. Now this time my dog gets up and goes over to the tent and searches the door because he wants to go in. I toss a couple of rocks in the direction that I heard the noise from and nothing happened. I'm spooked now, so I toss a couple of pieces of wood onto the fire and climb into the tent with my dog, hoping that the light from the fire keeps us away. We eventually fall asleep and luckily had no other disturbances during the night. The next morning, however, I go out behind the bushes where we heard the noises and found mountain lion tracks that had been circling our camp. I'm sure glad that we didn't actually go out to explore what was happening, and thank God for our fire. We live in a rural area, however, there are houses close to mine. We have a puppy, so one of us will always take him out. About a month ago, I had taken him out while we were out there, and I heard my boyfriend's voice calling my name. However, he wasn't outside, and he had a very similar experience where a voice whistled and called his puppy's name. What is this, and how do we get rid of it? I used to go hunting in southern Illinois on my property that my family owns. This place is literally my second home, and I've spent countless hours exploring every inch of it. I caught all the fish in the area, hunted every legal game and spotted the rest. So, when I say that I've never had an experience like this, just remember that this was my domain that I felt very comfortable in any weather at any time with any equipment, or lack thereof. Now 2 deer seasons ago, I pulled into the farm at probably about 4:30 in the morning, November, so at least 2 hours till sunlight. I put my stuff out of the truck and walked into the woods. Now I've got my shotgun and my revolver, so I'm fairly confident really. Now, I've also got my coffee with me and a backpack with a book and a couple of other things for cleaning my deer should I get lucky. So I walk off the drive and into the woods. The tree stand I'm going to is less than a mile away, but through some dense second growth forest and down a rather steep hill, across some bottoms, then a long burning steep climb up to another ridge. I always dread the hike, but it's a good spot so I often do it. I make it to the bottom, slush through the icky muck and get to the climb in. With my flashlight clipped to my chest, I keep needing to physically turn my body to throw the beam around and see the trees that I don't recognize so I can figure out where I am to determine my path with the ones I know. This, of course, always gives the forest a real horror movie vibe. Even on the best of days, the leaves and underbrush and encased forest are really creepy sometimes, so Every one of my steps comes with a solid crunch, no matter how quiet I'm trying to be. Now though, I noticed that there was more noise than normal. Something else was crunchy too. I walked about a quarter of the way up the hill listening to my company the whole time, seeming to stay the same distance away as I moved. Naturally, I think to myself that I'm going to have a quick hunting day, so I plopped myself down next to a tree. I can't shoot till first light, but I'm hoping if I stay really still that whatever I'm hearing will lounge around until then. So I click my light off, unhustle my shotgun, and lay it over my knees and wait. Except I don't hear anything now. Whatever it was must have been spooked by my flashlight spinning all the time. I'm still and start sipping my coffee to make sure, but give up after 15 minutes or so of dead silence. I probably didn't make even 4 steps before the second moving thing starts again. At this point, I'm not freaked out. I stay facing the way I am and flick on the light again and off quickly and step behind a tree. Sure enough, I don't hear a thing. 2 minutes of sitting there frustrated pass before I start moving again. This time, my new friend starts to move with me. This is when I start to freak out because I work my way up the hill, stopping to turn around and look every so often. When I stopped, the sound would go on for just an uneasy amount of time after I'd actually finished my own steps, like something saw me stop, and then did its very best to stop before I heard it, but it never worked. This happened no less than 4 times, and by now, I'm sweating bullets and freezing cold, because it's in the middle of winter. I abandoned my thermos near a tree so I could hold my flashlight and revolver at the same time. The last 100 feet or so to my stand was done backwards so I could be facing the noise, and in theory this means that it won't move. Now, I keep doing this moving backward and I don't hear anything. I got into my stand, smoked probably 5 cigarettes in a row. It gave me a sense of security being up in a tree behind camouflage. Still, I only hunted for like an hour of daylight and went back early. And I wasn't moving slow, I head straight back into the truck, even with the sun shining bright. I even told my family about it, but they wouldn't believe me. It was so freaky. The sound really sounds kind of human, but I'm not sure. It could have likely been poachers or trespassers, or the occasional wanderer onto the property, but still, ever since I went back hunting, I'm always much better at letting people know where I'm gonna go and how long I'm gonna be out there for. This event occurred in early fall 1971 or 1972. I'm not sure what jogged this memory, but it's probably to do with some of the stories I've been reading. Also, the details are sometimes grey, but I'll get to the point. I grew up in the Philly suburbs. The Boy Scouts were popular then, and I was quite active, especially with camping. One of the go-to areas was the New Jersey Pine Barrens, especially along the Wading River and the Bass River State Forest onto the Man. Now, our patrol was on a weekend camping trip at South Shore Campground, I think. Lots of pine breaks, but even more swamps and bogs and boggy swamps. Our patrol, which is probably 7 of us, plus one guy whose dad drove us, was assigned to a 3-sided shelter. The front of the shelter was open to the swamp. If you walked literally 11 feet from the shelter, you'd be standing in ankle-deep water. And then, it just got deeper and deeper and boggier. We mucked about Saturday until late afternoon, making our way to the shelter, cook dinner and chill until it gets dark. And it was crazy dark. I mean, no other campers around, just the light of our slowly dying fire. We began to hear a slow splashing coming from around the swamp, maybe 100 feet from our fire. One of the guys yelled something towards the sound and everything goes quiet. A minute later, the splashing began again, but slower and methodical. By this time, it was only about 15 feet away from the fire, but was out of the fire's light. Here's what our vibe was. None of us were concerned. We're all seasoned campers and figured it was a deer or raccoon looking to score an easy meal. Suddenly, the walking becomes slow and steady and sloshing. This perks us up, wondering if this thing may have suddenly decided to rush us. Our patrol leader jumps up, grabs his flashlight and pointed it towards the noise. His light hit something and yelled, "It's a man!" and ran to the swamp berm. I saw a brief flash of red flannel in the flashlight beam and then heard splashing back into the swamp. The splashing eventually faded to darkness. So what did we do? Tried to figure out what the hell just happened, then crawled into our sleeping bags to fall asleep. Nothing else had happened, and we went home the next day as scheduled. Thinking back on it now, it must have been a local piney who knew the area well. The man had to be native though, because he was going through some seriously dangerous swamps to check us out. So anyway, the pines have a great vibe, which is really eerie, and we had a great weekend. I'm not the kind of person to believe this kind of stuff, especially because I'm not superstitious at all, but these two encounters made me doubt whatever was actually happening on this farm. The first encounter occurred when me and two friends were having dinner. Everything was calm. We're eating outside, since this is a relatively big space. That's until we heard somebody scream. It's extremely odd because the country that I'm in is extremely safe, so this is weird. There's not really animal attacks here either. Now I'm the first one to react. I climb onto the wall that separated the house grounds from the animal parts. From there, I can see almost all the houses near ours. As I'm climbing up, I'm really not sure what to think, and my friends get there right after me. We stay in total silence waiting for another scream, and we heard it. This time, we could understand what she said. "Help," she yelled, then a bunch of gibberish that nobody could really understand. One of my friends quickly grabs a phone to call the police as we assume it could be domestic violence or robbery, and I grab my axe. My other friend follows me to the gate. We didn't leave. Nobody knew what we could find, since something sounded odd about the screams. Right before the police arrived, we heard a thud, and then glass breaking. I assume it was a window. As soon as the police arrived, the screams stopped, never to be heard again. The police found nothing. Later that night, me and my friends stayed up, chatting about what happened. One of them was oddly quiet when I asked him what was wrong, and he simply said, "I've heard those screams before." Apparently, he had heard the woman scream a couple of times while walking his dog. The next day we get up and decide to go check the house where the screams are coming from. But there was one weird thing about it when we arrive at the place, because there was no house. It was a forest, with nothing other than big trees and bushes. We came back and decided to forget what happened since we want to have a good time. No one would relate this encounter with a skinwalker obviously, and I didn't either at first, but when it happened twice I started to connect everything. The second encounter happened when my cousins were over, similar to the previous night. We were having a good peaceful dinner. That's when me and my cousins decided to go for a little walk in the garden we had. The garden made frontier with a huge forest, only separated by a small stone wall. We were just talking and laughing when I started to hear a man talking. Not in a normal voice, sounded like there was something in his throat, producing a really weird frequency sound. Again, I grabbed my axe and called the cousins. We got ourselves near the wall to hear what he was saying. Like, the first encounter we could only understand gibberish coming from him, and he wouldn't stop talking, not even breaking to catch his breath. After a while listening to it, we realised that we couldn't do anything about it, so decided to leave and finish our dinner. They leave, and I'm actually on my own now. It was quite unsettling. Then I start overthinking and thinking more, and I remember at times my dog would spend entire nights barking at the forest when all the existing animals we wiped out by the hunters. I remembered the warnings my parents gave me as a child to always leave that forest and lock the doors before sunset. Regardless of my questions, I know they'll never be answered. But it's something I just can't understand. Now, it all ended when the lumberjacks cut down all the grown trees, leaving the forest pretty visible. After they cut down the trees, whatever the thing was making sounds completely stopped, and my dog stopped barking at the wall. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid, but I'm not sure what to think. My dad and I went on a hiking trip a few days ago. My dad is a waterfall fanatic. He wants to see as many as possible. So he and I are hiking along a very pretty trail. We're hiking along a river. It's flowing nicely. There's mountains all around us. The trail is weaving around big, beautiful boulders. I'm hiking at most 30 feet ahead of him, looking for a spot to sit down and have picnic lunch on. And as I round a blind curve in the trail, I just freeze. Sitting on a stump maybe 10 feet off to the right is a guy. But he's wearing one of those colourful badger hoodies. With the hoodie pulled up, he's wearing a Halloween style bunny mask. He sees me and stands up right after my dad rounds a corner. We are all three sizing each other up in silence, and my dad addresses him. "What's up, buddy?" The masked man then tips his head as though he's deciding what to do with us. He then finally speaks, saying, "Oh, not much. You aren't the guys I'm waiting for. You have a good day." And then he turns and jogs off quickly. Strapped on his lower back is a large hunting knife and a pistol. We lose sight of him pretty quick. We hadn't seen a soul on the trail all day, and we'd been there for almost 4 hours. Needless to say, we leave the waterfall for another day and turn quick. Once we're off the trail, we report it to the local forest service and police, but they say they can't do much aside from keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. Now, the guy had no backpack or water or anything, which makes me think that he either had it stashed somewhere or was camping nearby. I hate to admit it, but I desperately wanted to ask the guy who he was looking for and why. Let me start by saying that I love camping. Anytime my friends and I come home from college, we loaded up our cooler with beer, grab some gear and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or friends ever wanted to go with me, so I often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day, the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed my gear, hopped in my car I borrowed from a buddy and drove to a spot that's secluded yet within safety of civilization if I need to get help. Camping also creeps me out though, but that feeling is always outweighed by the joy of it. So I make a little camp and a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much, but I'm enjoying myself reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got the feeling that I'm being watched and stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, but see a doe vault from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to camping. I just kept freaking myself out though, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, So I shrugged it off and kept whistling and just enjoying myself. Around 1, I decided to get into my tent and snuff out the lantern. I'd been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars until I passed out. It's around 2 a.m. I hear footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's a deer or some animal, maybe a raccoon, but I'm on guard. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open later, and I hear a rubbing sound and the tent fabric being pushed in a bit. I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed with fear. I desperately wanted to go and get the knife and stab this person, but I think maybe it's one of my buddies messing with me. Suddenly, it stopped. I was starting to feel more secure because daylight's coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I'm sure as hell not gonna sleep. All of a sudden, it's about 4 o'clock. I realise I should have my boots on in case anything were to happen. After having stayed up and keeping alert for a little longer, my friend's car alarm goes screaming. I sprint out of the tent. I got about 2 steps out before something grabs me around the mouth. I open my mouth to scream, but instead, the person stops me. I've heard that people can perform insane feats of strength with adrenaline rush. In my case, I just clamped down. His finger popped off almost. He screamed and pulled his hand away. He took off, running down the hill and into the opposite direction. I take off. I must have looked ridiculous, but I didn't care. I quickly make it into the car and speed it out of there, calling up my friends, telling them what's happened and the police, and get some real clothing. When the cops get there, they checked it out. The cops went out with a light. They brought me back some of my things that I left there. But what made me most scared is that right next to the tent was a gas can, and lighter fluid had been poured around my tent. The kicker is, they never caught the guy. So somewhere out there is some crazy guy that's looking to make fires in tents with people in them. Growing up, every summer in July and August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at the White Lake State Park in Tamworth, NH. Some of my best childhood memories were made there, with rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, etc. Now when I was around my late teens, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandpa passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one particular memory always stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 PM at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go and get some privacy to return the call. I then took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that, at the end, leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom. I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground was where I'm going and it's vacant. There was no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sit down at a table. There's lights from a distance that light up from behind the top of the hill behind me, illuminating my surroundings just a bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see the silhouette coming down from the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all the empty campsites are. I can see it's a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campsite for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights, so this person doesn't, but I'm not creeped out, just curious. As the person gets closer, I can see the outline better now, and that it's a man. I also noticed his pace slows down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continue conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes by now, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. Now I don't know if he can see me. Oh wait, he can now. He's staring at me. I step back. He was a little heavy and tall. I can make out he's wearing a jacket. I can't see many facial features, but I would guess that I was staring at a man in his late 40s or 50s. Alarm bells are going off in my head now. My mind has turned to mush at this point and I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend is saying. I just stare off at this guy. He starts moving now. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make a sound. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked as though he was charging towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of my mind-mushy frozen state and leaped forward off the picnic table and began running through the campsite back towards the trail. Thud, thud, thud. I can hear him getting closer now, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he gets close to whereabout I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and the sound of someone annoyed that they've tripped or hurt themselves. Most likely he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason it was, it causes him to just stop. I don't stop looking back. I just keep running and running until finally I make it back to my family's campsite. When I got back there, they're still having laughs and smiles by the campfire. I break down crying and I'm trembling. I explain what happened, and my aunt woke up and said, "Oh God." He probably thought that he was someone he knew and was doing it as a joke, dismissing me. My cousin saying, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realised he didn't know you, idiot." I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, there was no reason for them to really be afraid. My experience makes me think twice about going alone camping now. I always carry pepper spray with me too, and an alarm. I hope I never see that guy again. Now, while I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for every summer weekend. As we got older, we would visit a large rock we called the Cliffs and jump off it. The rock's only about 15 feet tall at the highest point. For the water, that's really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try and touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took our kayaks to the cliff's edge to jump on our own. We jump off several times. We then find a nice cold spot at the very top of the cliffs and chill there for a bit. As we're sitting there, we notice a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It's the letter H. Eventually, it sank back into the water and we lose sight. Before we can look away or even say anything else, another shape was floating upwards, the letter E. Eventually, it too sank below, but it was followed by 2 more letters. L-P. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up without saying a word and left. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it even happened. Several years ago, I was working as a camp counselor and told this story as a ghost story. I'd almost forgotten about it and texted my brother to see if I hadn't made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we jumped off the cliffs and saw something in the water. He said yes. I asked him what it was, and he too said it spelled out help. One of my friends always has these get-rich-quick schemes or shady ways of making money on the side. Now, in one of his more brilliant moves, he decides that he's going to rent a house out near the country line to host illegal poker games in. Yep. Anyway, on this property is probably 4 or 5 acres with this tiny rundown church about 1,000 yards away on the side, and there's a redneck guy who lives on the side in a trailer probably a quarter of a mile or so down the road. However, the property backs up to the woods, and since it's always cheaper than the range, and I and a third friend ask our renter friend if we can go shoot some guns on the property. He obliges us, and we head out there on a Saturday afternoon and find a nice berm at the tree line to shoot into. Now we're just shooting paper targets with pistols, so we're not that far back, and don't need that much room to do so. After a few magazines, we decide to venture deep into the woods to see just how far the property goes. Now we get down to the bottom of the hill and see fluorescent ribbons that the server ties to the trees to mark property lines. We realise that the property is way bigger than we ever thought before. We're already 200 yards into the woods now. Now just as we're remarking how big it is, we see a dead animal about 10 yards away from the property line. Walking up to examine it, we see that it's a goat that's had its head cut off, clearly done by a human. Then we see a severed goat head a little further away. Now the really creepy part to this is that it's not the same goat. There's 2 separate ones, and clearly due to the decay, it's been multiple days apart. Now if we weren't armed it would have been way scarier, but it's still creepy because I fear humans more than anything in the woods now. Now I say this was out in the country, but it's in South Carolina, so there's really not crazy expanses of wilderness. Being an East Coast state, there's pretty much all settled by people. The thing that gets me now is that there was a serial killer caught not too long ago around the time we were there, and apparently he started on animals too. My friends and I are on our way from Chicago back to our friend's home in Evansville, IN. As such, we had to drive through the Midwestern country to get there, pitch black highway surrounded by trees and cornfields. About 4 hours away from home, my friend screams and I look up. We hit a deer going 50. The poor guy just bounces off the front and probably didn't make it upon impact. We come to a stop and decide what to do. We are stranded on a quiet highway in the middle of nowhere, with trees to our right and a few houses a bit far off to the left, all of which are surrounded by cornfields. My friend is standing outside surveying the damage when we hear a scream. It's a man's scream, a bit far off to our left. My other friend and I look at each other, weary-eyed. A few minutes pass and we hear it once again. I then joke about skinwalkers, but we quickly get back into the car. A bit later, we call 911. We then hear another scream, a woman this time. It seems closer now. We're waiting on the deputy and nervously joking about whether it's skinwalkers or crazy elderly people with sundowners for whatever reason. My friend is facing towards the trees and laughs very nervously, rolling up the window. I just heard clicking noises outside my window and I'm rolling it up because I'm gonna pretend I didn't hear them. So anyway, now we're on our way back and out of Skinwalker country or whatever the hell that was. For some background, I'm 23 and have lived in the country all my life, growing up on the east side of Lake Winnipeg and moving to the west side as a teenager. This story takes place when I was around 17 and is non-fiction. Now after years of my family moving, I started dating my boyfriend at the time. I lived within the small town, but my boyfriend lived about 15 minutes out surrounded by woods. His only neighbour was about a mile down. Now on a September night, I was at his house watching movies and I wanted to go out for a cigarette at around 2 AM. He said he didn't want one, but for some reason I felt scared to go outside by myself. Probably because I was really tired and kind of out of it. So I make him come with me. We got out to the front deck in the dark. He's looking at his phone. I'm smoking and enjoying that crispful air when I hear the distant cry coming from the direction of the neighbour's house. It kind of sounded like it could be a dog or coyote. I said to my boyfriend, "What do you think it is?" To which he replied he thought it was the neighbour's dog. We're both leaning against the wall, trying to listen, and noticed that it's slowly getting louder and closer. It then changed in pitch and tone dramatically and become more guttural. It sounded like something kind of human but screeching for its life, but definitely not human. The type of scream that immediately makes you feel sick to your stomach. My blood turned to ice and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Staring at each other, we look around, not saying a word, both thinking the same thing. I don't think it could have been any of the animals that I was familiar with because I would have recognized them. This was different. It wasn't like the usual animals. I mean, I could definitely withstand them, and this definitely wasn't that. We listened to the awful sounds getting closer and closer for probably like 2 minutes before my boyfriend grabbed my arm, rushed me inside. We never lock our doors where I'm from, but God we did. Even making sure that we actually locked the windows. We jumped into bed freaking out trying to make sense of what the hell that was, and we still could hear it somewhat from where we are. We lay there silently for about 10 minutes and the screeching just stopped. Obviously we don't sleep much. The next day we drove past our neighbour's house and the dog was fine, just chilling in the driveway. Nothing was out of the ordinary and it never happened again. We ended up breaking up early the next summer, but God, it still freaks me out. I'm a park ranger here and I want to share this story with you all today. And that's just so you know that you should always trust your eyes and visions, even if people try and tell you not to. Let me give some context. I was in a really beautiful area of forest land. It's one that I actually grew up further away from, so I appreciated it more because of this. I've been working here for lots of different years and fell in love with the place. It was really like a second home to me. Now, I always had a good time, even if I was working there during the wintry months. I don't know why, it was just something I'd really enjoyed doing. I didn't like the cold though, that was for sure. I always made sure that I wore lots of different layers during the winter months because the cold is your worst enemy. It can help you find people sometimes if you can track footsteps, but that's only if there isn't fresh snowfall which hinders it. But the hypothermia was an issue. The other thing too is when it's really cold out there, you have to be careful of getting frostbite, and of course if you're looking for a missing person, if they haven't got a fire going, well, good luck. Now, some of my rangers had actually been calling in to me saying that they had reports of a strange flash in the woods. They couldn't really identify what it was and they were worried it was hunters that were there illegally. and of course it was my job to investigate. Now, I had personally never seen any of these flashes before. We'd actually encountered illegal hunters before, so I was pretty ready to deal with this. You always have to be careful because of course they're well armed, but remember that they're people and you can just talk them down, and normally they're pretty friendly. I was on patrol one day when we had a call out of this strange flash again, and it was my job to go and investigate it. Now, I wasn't really looking forward to this because I'd just left the station, so I was quite nice and warm, and I didn't want to be out there too long. I wanted to get home for something, but I knew my shift was probably going to go over a bit, but hey, it's a part of the job. Now, I wasn't actually too worried about sunlight or anything because at this point it was relatively early in the day, so I didn't have to worry about having enough daylight to be able to do my job. So, I set out on my patrol. At the time I'm following quite a nice clearing through the trees. Now, you can see some beautiful slight mountainscapes around me, which I think is really beautiful. You can actually hear echoes really well off of these, and I think it makes the whole place look really beautiful. No snow's really falling at the time, only pieces off of other trees, so it helps make this experience more pleasant for me. I get to the first area that I have to cover, and I don't have any signs of hunters. I actually keep frequently calling out in the hopes that I can find them sooner and get back. I then head over to the next area that I need to cover, and there's some really nice trees around me again. These are actually better for me because they're a lot smaller, but if a hunter's in camouflage I'm not going to be able to see them very well regardless. Even if you've been trained to be out here for years, it's still extremely difficult to spot anything that's concealed, especially animals too. I make my way down to the final search area, and nothing. I decide that I should be still for a while, and I hear a slight clicking sound. I think this is really odd because I haven't noticed it before, but it just feels a little off. I make my way back towards where the vehicle is now. It's quite a walk, so I'm ready for it. I decide to go for a different part of the forest that is actually off of the trail now in hopes of finding the hunters. And there it is, a slight flash just up ahead of me. Now, what was weird about this is it seemed to be too high up to make sense for a person to be doing anything. I thought maybe it was a strange reflection off of their binoculars, so I head up there to go and investigate. I call out to them to stop and they're not supposed to hunt here, and suddenly there's movement quickly going away from me. Oh great, they're trying not to be found. Not on my watch, I decide, as I carefully make my way over a short tree that's fallen over a stream, and continue after them. I have to stop for a moment to catch my breath, and I can just about make out this person running off before I lose them. I'm in a very heavily snowed part of the forest now, where the snow's very deep and I have to take extra care. As I'm doing so, another flash appears just up ahead of me, roughly where the person ran off into. I'm not so sure whether it's binoculars now because of the nature of the flashes I'm seeing. Again, I think this is pretty odd, but I decide I have to press on and be brave. I shout out, "Hey, you're not supposed to be doing that, I'm a park ranger, come here now." To which, again, they seem to vanish. I think this is really odd and I'm actually becoming somewhat agitated now. I decide that maybe I should use reverse psychology and just be quiet and try and make my way back, then call it in, and see whether announcing this is enough to scare this person off or at least make them turn themselves in. It's a perfect plan, I decide, and I start making my way back directly towards the station now, not much further from where the vehicle is. I can see the normal road now and I'm near more tall trees when, once again, there's a flash, this time much closer though. I suddenly lock eyes with somebody wearing a camouflage suit, holding a camera who's constantly flashing pictures of me. So now I know that this definitely isn't a hunter, and for some reason they just don't look right. There was no military operations out here that I was aware of, and why were they taking pictures of me with an old camera? I then go to speak, but before I can get a word out, I hear a maniac laugh as this person turns around and sprints off into the wilderness. They seem to be moving extremely quick considering the rough terrain. This person seems completely off their head. And for the first time in years of doing this job, other than the time I encountered a mountain lion, I'm actually very scared, and I sprint into the station and radio him what happened. Eventually some of the other rangers joined us, and we conduct a really big search and get the local authorities involved, but we can never find anything. What's weirder is this went on for months and months after, not directly with myself, but with other rangers too, who all reported the same thing. Strange blurry movements off in the distance followed by flashes that seemed to follow them everywhere, and every so often, someone would hear the laugh like I heard. Now, the thought of a maniac being out there in absolutely freezing conditions, in camouflage, taking pictures of us, stalking us for God knows how many days, absolutely terrifies me to the core. And the thing I hate about it, we never found out who that was or what they were doing, or what they were using the pictures for, and that's what I hate about it. To this day, I still don't know why that happened. So my dad and I were walking through the woods when we come across a young moose leg lying on the ground. It looks as though it's been violently torn off with no sign of the rest of the moose anywhere. It was fresh with blood on the ground, and probably no more than a couple of hours old. My dad's a pretty skilled hunter, so he handed me his axe, and he actually looks relatively nervous now at this point in time, telling me watch for wolves, and we start looking for tracks. After a little bit he came back saying, "That's weird. Normally if there's wolves you'd be able to find the paw prints, but I can't find anything. Also no bear prints, so I don't know what killed this." And so I'm like, "What do you mean? Didn't you find anything?" And he very reassuringly responded with, "Well, I did find what appears to be Mama Moose tracks heading this way," showing me the tracks. "Can you see how long the stride is here? It's a lot longer here. Whatever got her baby, she didn't want to fight and just took off running." He then pulls out the bear spray and holds it ready as we keep walking deeper into the woods. We eventually make it out safe, but I still don't know what it was to this day. Now, I'm not a ranger, but back in the early 90s, my brother and I were staying with cousin and her husband, who I'll call Scott, who was a DNR officer. This was opening day of deer bow season in northern Michigan. While I was at least a mile away from any other road or trail, I stumbled across an area that looked like people had been camping there recently. They'd even built this weird outdoor kitchen. Being a naive 16 or 17-year-old, the kitchen confused me because I figured they'd left because of hunting season, so I started making my way there. That night, I was telling everybody about it when Scott gets nervous and told me it doesn't look right, and then says to me, "Can you describe it?" and looks really worried. He told me do not go back there, and I'm glad. Apparently some locals had multiple locations that they would go to cook meth, so they wouldn't blow up their house and it made it harder to get caught. I guess Scott reported it to the police because they raided it a few days later. I must have missed it, but the guys had set up multiple trail cams, which are actually really expensive, especially back then, all around the area. Based on the pics of them, I must have missed the guys by a few hours. They were heavily armed and all I had was a knife. On the surface it seems like a well thought out plan for some smart people, but they weren't very smart. Scott filled us up on some details afterwards. Apparently they didn't clear the images off the cameras before leaving. Though very low, they could recognize their faces, and it showed them not only cooking meth but also carrying illegal guns and riding off on custom four-wheelers that are known to everyone in the area. No, I'm not a ranger, but here's a pretty weird wood story. It's late spring. Heavy rain had flooded the dike and public hunting grounds, so I decided that I'm gonna go fishing in the shallows with my buddy. We have a good time. Didn't really catch anything, and it's getting pretty dark, so we light a fire to go dry off before heading back. As the sunlight is swallowed up, we hear something I can only describe as a blood-curdling scream coming from the distance. A little girl almost. Frogs and what we thought keep talking. Twigs snapping now, then again, but much closer. Then we hear it. Could have been as close as 30 feet or even more in the tree line. We hightail it out of there and laugh it off once we get home. Fast forward 6 years, I'm on break and I'm telling the story to my lead, and he pulls up a video and lets me listen. It's the exact same scream. He gives me the phone and I see a mountain lion, realizing they make that sound as a final warning. I was doing some urban exploration in a dilapidated church at night. On one of the floors was the circular motif in the floor where I guess a podium or something was. There was fresh blood on it as though something was killed there. We went into the basement later on, and we heard someone running upstairs. I managed to escape from it, but it was still the most scary thing that ever happened. So I went on a mountain hike in Transylvania with a group of friends from school, and way up, after maybe 12 to 14 kilometers of trekking, we saw a house. It was in the middle of nowhere. It had a barn with a few animals like a couple of cows, chickens, etc. As we get closer we see a few people, a guy and 5 to 6 women. Not sure if there are any more inside or not. The dude comes to greet us, barely speaking language. We had a hard time understanding what he was saying. They lived without electricity, gas or anything, and this is in the early 90s, so there's no internet, mobile phones to worry about. At least for most people. Anyway, they all kind of looked at us weird, with kinda dumb expressions on their faces. We can barely understand each other. They said to us, "Who's the president now, and do we want some milk?" They look at our clothes weirdly, curious, like, who knows when's the last time that they actually had human contact? Or maybe we were just crazy for being different, I don't know. Not sure to this day what was going on. It's not typical in religion, so it kind of freaked us out, especially because the guy looked really disturbed, and we were too young. We were looking around to see if there's more of them. Paranoia was taken over, thinking there must have been a village nearby. What was also weird is that all the women keep their distance and never got close to us like he was guarding them or checking us out to see if it's safe for them. One of my friends kept saying that we don't want their milk and we need to go because it's getting dark out. We calmly ended up making our way back and out of their sight. We then get out of there as quick as possible to try and make it back to safety. Needless to say, we camped for a couple of hours and we always had one person staying on watch the whole time. We told people that were living in the villages near there about the mountain people and they didn't believe us. They don't think anything happened. A little over 18 years ago, I'd just gotten out of the military. I drove all the way from Louisiana to my hometown in Montana without incident. I spent a few days at home and then got back on the road because my new home destination was Bias, Idaho. It was February, so instead of going straight down the length of the state, I cut across the panhandle into Washington. The highway going straight down through the state is really twisted and very dangerous in water. So I crossed the state line into Washington. It was a Sunday and it was very, very early in the morning. As cliche as it sounds, there was quite a bit of fog in the air. I'd been driving for a while and really had to use the bathroom. Now, normally, given how I'm in the middle of nowhere, I would just pull over to the side of the road and take a whiz, but it was so foggy and hard to see, I thought it was safer to wait until I hit the next small town. So I drove for maybe 5 more miles and started seeing signs for a town. I can't remember for the life of me the name of the town, but I think it was Linden or Linda or something like that. It was on the I-90 going to Spunky Valley, so I head towards the sign, which was a right turn off the interstate, and it's a short drive up this road and I reached the town. It was small, but I thought nothing of it since I was from a small town in Montana. Now this is where things get odd. There was not a single person to be found. There were cars and businesses, but not a single person to be found walking around the street, no logging trucks or anyone driving really. Everything was just as still as the air. I stopped at a gas station. It was one of those one in all places that did car repairs, spare tyres, etc., but nobody is at the counter. I thought, well, maybe this was just really odd. But maybe it's early in the morning, so I went around to the side to see if the bathroom was locked, and it was. As I made my way back around the front of the store, I can see that finally there's some life. There's a delivery truck. It was a Coke Classic truck. Now it's not actually moving though. It's got its hazards on, and the passenger and driver side doors are open, just sitting in the middle of the street. So yeah, I get a bad vibe, so I go back in my car and went back the way I come through. And I go back to the I-90 and thought again about just peeing at the side of the road, but honestly, I was too afraid. I continue driving until I eventually get to the next area, and honestly, I'm more freaked out and actually forget I need to use the toilet. I didn't see anything creepy or hear anything creepy, but the stillness of the air and the complete lack of human or animal life, which is absolutely terrifying. I looked on the map to see where I was once I got there, which was a Randy McNally's map, and I could not find it at all on the map. Even as I'm writing this, I looked on Google Maps and I can't actually find where I was. I still to this day will never forget that weird feeling of total displacement. When I got to Bose, I told my friend about it and he thought I was trying to rip off Silent Hill or something, or Resident Evil, but honestly, I can't blame people for saying that. But at the same time, there was a reason that I wouldn't urinate at the side of the road. I kept recalling the part in RE1 where hikers were killed by murderous dogs. Anyway, I don't really know what to think of this. I hope no one else has to discover this creepy place. Now I'm somebody who loved to do urban exploring, and I actually had a few stories that I think you guys might find interesting. Now, there was a specific area that I loved to go to. There was lots of abandoned buildings and things around this, and it was covered in trees, so it was really a beautiful forest. Now I remember on one particular occasion that I headed out, I thought maybe it's not such a good idea to go out here on my own, and I grabbed my buddy as we go on one of our night adventures. Now to get to this particular area, we have to go through a normal park. So me and my friend decide that we're going to wait it out under a tree, watch when all the security lock up everything, not make a sound, then leave. Well, that's exactly what we do. We watch the security come through, and they seem to look directly at us, but they don't stop for anything. We feel a lot more relieved when they've actually managed to leave. Now my adrenaline was running very high, because, I don't know, there's some kind of excitement when you're doing this, and we decide to wait a few minutes before getting up. My friend actually has some small binoculars, so we actually get a really good view of what's happening, and luckily we can see that the park is empty now, so we get up and head out. Now you could actually see pretty well just because the area that we're in. Now I know at the time it was probably really stupid, but we were young and didn't think of this. There was actually a house attached to this area, so the resident was probably scared for their life. But anyway, we were planning to explore the abandoned quarry which was very close to the park. We make it over the last security fence and we're having a really good time now exploring. There's not really too much to see, just old abandoned equipment everywhere. We ended up going on top of some kind of excavation machine which was really big. Luckily we're both lightweight so it doesn't make too much sound. We make it on top of it and we just sit here for an hour talking about life and I guess anything really. As we're talking, we both stop dead as we hear a dog bark in the distance. Now this could be anything because there's other residents that have dogs, but this sounded different. I don't know how to describe it. It sounded very vicious. Oh god man, it's a security dog, I thought to myself. I didn't say anything to my friend and eventually our confidence comes back and we continue our little explore. Now, everything seems normal and we ended up just throwing rocks into the water stream running past. I mean really, we'd done everything we wanted to and we just got kind of bored. Just as we did that, we heard somebody shout out, screaming in the distance. We had no idea what was happening, but we both shot down really quick, hiding on the embankment next to the water. I was quite worried about falling in the water, but god, these screams sounded horrible. It sounded like somebody was being murdered. And this went on for a good 2 minutes until suddenly there was absolute silence. We then looked up and my friend using the binoculars could see there was a group of at least 12 people, all wearing all black with their faces covered, and they were next to a car but we couldn't see what they were doing. I whispered to my friend how many are there, and the dog starts barking. It seems to be pointing in our direction because all of the men simultaneously look up to where we are. We suddenly hear cars starting up and that was our cue to get out of there. They start screaming out to us. Immediately I knew something was off. This wasn't normal security, this was something far worse. At first we're debating on jumping over the stream, but we realise we're not going to be able to make it, so at this point we're basically trapped in. Now we have two options. We can either run to the left of them or run to the right all the way round to try and escape them. We decide neither's really a good idea, but we have to go to the right side of them. We can suddenly hear that they started after us and we both sprint. We eventually manage to make it back into the normal park and believe we're somewhat safe, but we now have to sprint for probably 300 meters to get to the other side. We eventually made it out and both made it home but didn't tell anyone about what happened. A few weeks later, the police ended up busting the place and they found out there was a massive drugs operation here. The police never found any bodies or anything like that, but I'm sure they were torturing someone that time. Now that was my first story. Now my other story actually is a far more weird one, but for different reasons. Now like I said, I was somebody who loved to go urban exploring and being in the great outdoors effectively. Now I set off in one particular area that had reports for years of an abandoned church being there that nobody had been to for at least 5 years, and me and a couple of friends wanted to go see what was up. Now to add to the creepy vibes of October, there was mist everywhere and you couldn't really see too far down the road, or whatever area you're in, but imagine being in a forest with thick trees. It was almost like darkness when you were under them, but this is what we loved, so we set out. For a while we were messing around with our flashlights saying we're probably never going to find this thing, and started pretending it was Star Wars or something, but we suddenly become more focused when one of my friends seems to recognise the area and says we're definitely going in the right direction. Unfortunately for us, this means going into a section of the forest which has very, very heavy trees, So basically all we're seeing is darkness now. The trees are superimposing their authority onto us at this point, letting us know that we're not really supposed to be here and something is off, but of course, we ignore every single warning sign that there is and we continue on. Now we're going down an old loggers path at the time and it seems pretty safe. I say old loggers path, but I'm not really sure what it is. Every so often on the walk, you can see some white patches, which is where snow has fallen not too long ago. That's how cold it was. We pick up a few snowballs and start throwing them around randomly. Some of us can actually hit trees and it actually helps us see a bit further up. We eventually come around another section of the woods and find nothing. We're all making fun of my friend saying, "You've got no idea what you're talking about, there's literally nothing here." To which he laughs and says, "Yeah, but I think we need to go deeper now." We all look at each other a little hesitantly because around us there's nothing but tall dark trees and you can just about see daylight breaking through the fog above us. But that doesn't deter us because again, we're stupid at this time. So we continue on into the wilderness. Now we must have walked for about another good hour before we make it through to a clearing again. You can actually see a lot better now because of the snow. And what do you know? Just round the bend, looking like something straight out of a horror film, you can see an abandoned church, or at least the very top of it. We're all absolutely ecstatic at this and we start running towards it when my friend stops and screams saying he's sure that he's just seen a figure up there. I was actually annoyed because the short scream he let out really scared me. A couple of birds that were hiding in the nearby trees flew off really quickly. They were just as scared as we are. We tell our friend that you have to be quiet, but he's telling us no, I definitely saw something there and he refuses to go in. Now we decide that we're going to go on and investigate, and my god, this thing is massive. It's mostly a wooden construction, but it's kind of beautiful really. We can't go in through the door because it's collapsed, but luckily my friend finds another way in through a broken window. This thing has 2 floors, and it's really beautiful. Now what was really odd was the smell. There was kind of a strange metallic smell that none of us could really describe or explain as being metal, but it was very similar. We can't really see too much out of the ordinary, but this thing is really cool. One of my friends sat down pretending that he was praying, and I tell him to knock it off, that we should still be respectful while we're here. He ends up listening to me and quickly jumps up. One of my friends wants to explore the upstairs, but we say that the stairs are too dangerous. There's no way we're going to get up there. What's more is we keep hearing strange sounds from further down, and being the young kids that we are, we have to go and investigate. I decide bravely that I'm going to go down first, and I take one step onto the floor and I slip over. I say, "God, hell, what is this?" As my friend helps me up. The smell was awful. My friend flicks on his flashlight and there seems to be animal blood everywhere. It's absolutely disgusting. But the weirdest thing is there's no animals. We think maybe some animal must have lived here and took its prey, but there was no signs of that at all. Literally just blood everywhere. There's not really writing or pentagrams, but it seems like a person's done this. We all look at each other really confused and decide that it's time to leave, so we make it back upstairs again. I didn't realise how nice this place really was, and there's a large cross in the middle of the place, just in front of where the church seats are. I didn't tell anyone at the time, but I actually prayed to be safe there. I knew something was wrong when the animal blood was everywhere, but I didn't tell anybody else. I just asked God to keep us safe. Now as I get up, I can see another one of my friends going to pretend to pray, kind of making fun of what I was just doing. He puts his hand into the praying position, smiling, and I realise one of my friend's flashlights is on. I turn around to go and see who did it, but I realised that everywhere's glowing a strange red and kind of grey colour. It's almost like somebody flicked on the lights in a different tone. My jaw drops and I turn around to look at my friends, and they're all seeing exactly what I am, because they all look at me just as shocked and confused. That's everybody except for the friend who was pretending to pray until he opens his eyes and suddenly realises that something's wrong and starts rubbing his eyes. What's really strange is that seconds after this, a very high wind picked up and it's really howling and we can hear rain outside. We realise something's wrong and that we need to get out of here. We go to make our way outside the door and there's a very loud punching sound on the other side of it. We all scream and quickly go the opposite direction. We realise now that the only place we can go is into the basement. Good lord, I don't want to do this, I say to my friend. Come on, we've got to, as he pushes me forward. I'd honestly rather be anywhere but down in that smelly basement, but it seems to be the only place we can go. We wait here and we can hear the sounds outside intensifying. At this point, I honestly thought I was gonna die. I don't know what I had done wrong in life, but I wasn't ready to die now, and I don't think my friends were either. We stayed down here for a good 5 minutes until the noises outside started to slowly cease. Weirdly, the bang inside outside kept on going until eventually it come to nothing. I wasn't sure whether it was some weirdo playing tricks on us, or I don't know what I thought it was. But we suddenly realised that my other friend is outside, the one who was too scared to go in. We realised that we must get out of here, and we quickly go upstairs hesitantly. Now everything seems to be as it was. It's foggy outside and a little bit light, but it's not that strange colour, and the wind has stopped completely. Now I didn't really want to go outside first, just in case someone was waiting for us with a big axe to kill us, but one of my friends quickly jumped out, saying, "I'm ready to fight you." To which the other friend replied, "What are you talking about?" We all come sprinting after him and he says, "Come on, what are you guys doing? I've been waiting here for ages. And why did you go on that rooftop? I told you this is so dangerous." Before we could say our side of the story on what happened, we all looked at each other and I said to my buddy, "John, you know there was no stairs on that place, right?" To which he turns completely pale. My friend quickly fills him in on what happened and we all agree that we have to get out of there. We probably jogged for about 3 minutes, but this was hindered by our levels of fitness, and we basically hiked the rest of the way into the normal part of the forest. We were so scared that we didn't look back the way that we come from. While we were moving, I was half expecting to see something chasing us, or people. I was so scared that every time I was seeing strange patches of snow, I would think I'd see pentagrams and things on the floor, just where I was at such a heightened sense of panic. We continued down and the air feels very cold now. None of us actually stopped to talk to each other while we're getting out of there. We just all look around very paranoid, making sure that it's safe now. We continue on until eventually we make it to the normal area that we know, and we're not far back to safety. We all jump into my friend's truck and get out of there. We weren't driving at a sensible speed too, I can tell you that, but who could blame us? Now the thing that's really strange is that all of us saw the exact same thing inside the church, heard the same wind outside and the same banging, but all my friend waiting outside saw was a person on the roof after a while, who moved into sight quickly, seemed to stare at him, then gone back to the other side of the roof. Now I know for a fact nobody could have gotten up there, because there weren't any stairs, and there's no way you could climb up it, so who the hell was it? What were they doing up there? And why did we experience different things? I'd like to think this was some kind of elaborate hoax, or maybe it was something to do with Satan worshippers, but I really don't know.